What will you do if the restaurant you eat every day and night cooks something else for you to eat every day without you knowing? Will you still keep going there because the food is sweet, or what will you do to the restaurant if you find out that the delicious meat you eat in your meals are meat from dead body? Please like, share and subscribe to my channel for interesting videos like this. In the bustling city of Niger, life was hard for everyone. Jobs were scarce, and the streets were filled with people trying to make a living by any means necessary. Among them was a woman named Amina. She lived in a crowded neighborhood where people hustled daily to survive. Amina had always been resourceful, but times were tougher than she'd ever imagined. She had lost her husband in a tragic accident 2 years earlier, and raising her 2 children alone had pushed her to her limits. Her small food business wasn't bringing in enough money, and her landlord was threatening to evict her. One night, as Amina sat outside her tiny room, she overheard a group of young men whispering in the shadows. They were talking about a morgue on the outskirts of the city. "You know, they don't always bury the bodies," one of them said. "Some are abandoned by families who can't afford funerals." Amina's ears perked up. She thought about her struggles and the empty pots in her kitchen. Her customers loved her food, but she couldn't afford meat anymore. The little money she made went to rent, school fees, and medicine for her sick daughter. The idea planted itself in her mind like a seed. Could she really do something so unthinkable? Amina couldn't sleep that night. The thought of using abandoned bodies haunted her, but desperation won over morality. Early the next morning, before the city woke up, she wrapped a scarf around her head and set out for the morgue. The morgue was in a rundown part of the city. It smelled of decay and death. Amina approached the gate cautiously. She had no plan, just desperation driving her actions. To her surprise, the gatekeeper was a man who looked just as desperate as she felt. His uniform was ragged, and his eyes were dull. Amina offered him a bribe, half the money she had made the previous day. "I just need to take a look," she lied. The man hesitated but eventually let her in. Inside, Amina saw rows of bodies, some wrapped in cloth, others lying uncovered. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she reminded herself why she was there. Her children needed to eat. She spotted a body that looked fresh, a young man, perhaps in his 20s. Without thinking too much, she took what she needed, wrapped it in a sack, and left. That evening, Amina prepared her food as usual. She made her famous pepper soup, adding the fresh meat she had taken. She seasoned it heavily, hoping to mask any trace of its origin. At her street-side food store, people lined up as they always did. They didn't ask questions, they just ate. To her surprise, the customers praised her food more than ever before. "Sister Amina, this meat is so tender. What's your secret?" one man asked, licking his fingers. "Oh, it's just the spices," she replied with a nervous smile. Word spread quickly, and more people came to her store the next day. Amina couldn't believe her luck. For the first time in months, she had enough money to pay her rent and buy medicine for her daughter. But deep down, she knew what she was doing was wrong. Over the next few weeks, Amina continued her trips to the morgue. The gatekeeper, now used to her visits, stopped asking questions as long as she paid him. She became more confident and efficient, selecting bodies that looked fresh and storing the meat in her tiny freezer at home. Her business thrived. She upgraded her store, buying new chairs and tables for her customers. She even hired a young boy to help serve food. People began calling her the Queen of Pepper Soup, and she became a local celebrity. But not everyone was happy. Amina's neighbor, Mama Nkechi, was an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She was known for being nosy and loved gossiping about everyone. Mama Nkechi had always been skeptical of Amina's sudden success. "One day, we will know the truth about her," she muttered to herself as she watched Amina from her balcony. One evening, as Amina carried a sack into her house, Mama Nkechi decided to follow her. She peered through a crack in the window and saw Amina chopping something on her kitchen counter. It didn't look like any meat Mama Nkechi had ever seen. The old woman's eyes widened in horror. "This is not normal meat," she whispered. The next morning, Mama Nkechi confronted Amina at the market. "Amina, what kind of meat are you selling?" she asked loudly, drawing the attention of nearby customers. Amina froze but quickly composed herself. "What kind of question is that, Mama Nkechi?" "It's goat meat, of course." But Mama Nkechi wasn't convinced. "I've seen things, Amina. Be careful. The spirits of the dead do not rest quietly when their bodies are disturbed." Amina laughed nervously and dismissed the old woman's warning. But that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Amina couldn't sleep that night. Mama Nkechi's words echoed in her mind. "The spirits of the dead do not rest quietly." She tried to convince herself that the old woman was just meddling, but deep down, fear began to creep in. Around midnight, as she lay in bed, she heard a faint knock on her door. It was so soft that she thought she had imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. Her heart pounded. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. There was no answer. Summoning her courage, Amina opened the door slightly and peered outside. The street was empty, except for a faint mist swirling under the dim street lights. She quickly shut the door and bolted it. The following nights were worse. Amina started hearing strange sounds in her house, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, footsteps in the hallway, and faint sobbing near her kitchen. One night, while chopping meat, she felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. The knife slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. "It's just my imagination," she told herself. But the incidents became more frequent. Her children began complaining about nightmares. Her youngest, Fatima, said she saw a man standing by her bed at night. "He was tall, Mama," Fatima said, trembling. "He had no eyes." Amina's heart sank. At first, Amina's customers continued to flock to her stall. But soon, strange things started happening there too. One regular customer, a taxi driver named Sola, complained that after eating her pepper soup, he had vivid nightmares about being buried alive. Another customer swore he saw blood dripping from his plate, but when he looked again, it was gone. Rumors began to spread. Some said Amina's food was cursed. Others whispered that she was practicing witchcraft. Her once thriving business began to decline. Panicked, Amina decided to confront the gatekeeper at the morgue. She stormed to the rundown building late one evening, finding him sitting by the gate with a bottle of gin. "What's happening to me?" she demanded. "You never told me there would be consequences." The gatekeeper chuckled darkly. "You think you can take from the dead and go free?" These bodies don't belong to you, woman. The spirits are angry. Amina's niece weakened. What can I do to stop this? The man leaned closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. There's only one way. Return what you took. All of it. She shook her head. I can't do that. The meat is gone. Then prepare yourself, he said grimly. The dead will come for you. That night, Amina decided she would stop. No more trips to the morgue. She would find a way to make an honest living. But it was too late. As she slept, she dreamed of the bodies she had taken. They stood around her bed, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes filled with anger. Why did you take us? They whispered. We were at peace. Amina woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. She stumbled to the kitchen for water, but when she turned on the light, she froze. There, on the counter, was a slab of raw meat. But it wasn't meat she had bought, it was grey, decayed, and covered in blood. She dropped the glass in her hand and backed away, but the whispering voices grew louder. You cannot run from us, they said. By morning, Amina was a wreck. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembled, and her mind was on the brink of collapse. She knew she couldn't continue living like this. That afternoon, as people gathered at the market, Amina did something no one expected. She stood on a wooden crate in the middle of the crowd and shouted, I have something to confess. The bustling market grew silent as everyone turned to her. For months, I have been feeding you meat from the dead. I took bodies from the morgue and cooked them for my pepper soup. I was desperate, but I know now that what I did was wrong. The spirits are haunting me, and I cannot live with this guilt any longer. The crowd erupted in shock and anger. People shouted insults, some threw stones, and others called for her arrest. Amina didn't resist when the police arrived. She knew she deserved whatever punishment awaited her. Amina was sentenced to years in prison, but even behind bars, she was not free. The spirits continued to haunt her, tormenting her dreams and making her life a living nightmare. Her story became a cautionary tale in the city of Niger. Parents told their children, do not let desperation lead you to evil, or you will end up like Amina. And so, the name Amina became a warning, a reminder that the dead must never be disturbed.